Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans, and I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 25 years. I started during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house. I was on disability from work and happened to get paired up with a psychologist who even back in the late 90s had been practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation for several decades. And this is what he offered to me as a strategy for working with what I was going through. And I was not impressed with his suggestion. My feeling was I can't work, I can't go, I can't do anything, I can't leave the friggin' house. And here's this guy talking about watching the breathing and stuff. I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But it was all he gave me at first. And I figured, okay, well, I'm sitting at home panicking all day anyway. I might as well give this a shot just long enough. I can go back to him and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now, please? And 25 years on, I've never had that conversation with him. And I'm still practicing, and I'm teaching. And never been so glad to be so wrong. So here I am. And here you are. Thanks for being with me today. Today's talk is building self-trust. And this sort of kinda builds upon one of our recent sessions, which was about feeling grounded. And you don't have to have been at that session for, to follow this one. This is a standalone session, but it kind of comes out of that because we're going to talk about an aspect of feeling grounded that I don't really have a chance to get into in that one. It kind of demands its own session. Last time we talked a bit about how we work with things like unfamiliarity, discomfort, feelings of misalignment, like between the mind and body, and how those can result in feelings of feeling ungrounded, feeling unmoored. We did some work with bringing attention to bodily sensations and our perceptions around that. But one thing we didn't really have a chance to cover is the importance of trust for feeling grounded. And more specifically, how or what we trust. And I want to illustrate this by giving an example that literally involves grounding that comes out of a story that I'm sorry to say, for the last couple of years, I have been mistelling in some of these sessions. So over the course of time, the punchline to this story is one that has gotten munged in my own mind. And I've been telling it wrong. And when I went back to look at my notes for this session, which I haven't given in a couple of years, I found the original line. And I was like, well, good goddamn. This is a lot better. So I'm going to share the right one this time. So some of you may have heard me tell a story before about how a number of years ago when I was in yoga class one day, I was in half moon pose. And half moon pose, for those who might not be familiar, is a very challenging balancing pose. And one day, as I was in half moon pose with the rest of the class, the teacher comes up behind me and very gently lays his hand in the middle of my back. Not in such a way that it's, holding me up or pushing me, just very gently laid his hand. And what I remembered for the last couple of years him saying was, I feel you struggling, which means you either don't trust me or you don't trust yourself. That's the mistelling. This is what he actually said. What he actually said was, I feel you struggling, which means you're not trusting someone, either yourself or the floor. Huge difference. Huge difference. I'm going to come back to that. And I've noticed some other interesting ways that I find, oh, you know what? I don't seem to be trusting certain things that, well, it just doesn't make any sense. I'll give you an idea what I mean. Sometimes I notice I'll be sitting on a chair and find that I am tensed in such a way that I'm like holding myself up. Like even in my legs, which are up against the chair, right? Like tensing against the chair. I'm doing it as I'm saying this. As if I don't trust the chair can support my weight. Now, those of you who have seen me in real life know I'm not the biggest guy. And yet there's this, I can't trust the chair's going to hold me up and I'm going to fall. So I gotta be ready. Something else I noticed that's really an interesting one is when I'm driving. And I drive a pickup truck. When I'm driving, I'll notice sometimes when I'm turning the wheel, making a right turn, making a left turn, I'm like pushing against it as I'm turning, as if the truck needs my help. Right? This couple of ton piece of machinery, it can't quite handle the turning of the wheel that's going to turn no, it needs my little extra push, right? Geez, where the hell is this coming from? Interesting. So I start to notice these little telltale signs of how I'm not trusting these objects out in the world that, well, can handle whatever I'm throwing at them just fine. But what's really interesting is when we start turning that inward and start to discover the ways that, well, we're not just fighting things out in the world, seeing the ways that we're fighting ourselves. I find that we generally go in one of two directions. We go on defense against some kind of a perceived inner threat, or we go on offense against some kind of a perceived inner weakness. Either way, they're both coming from this underlying question or worry and saying, will I be safe? Will I be okay? Is it going to be all right? And two of the most common strategies that are really intertwined, they play off of each other, that I find that we use to try to stave off this incredible discomfort and fear from this question of, am I going to be okay? Two of the common strategies that we employ are interrogation and demanding. And I'll give you examples from my own past with this, from when I was dealing with the panic disorder that left me housebound for 6 months. I did not trust my mind or my body not to sell me out. I didn't know if at any given moment, the heart rate's going to get too fast. Might be a panic attack. My mind's going to go off in a certain direction. That could spark a panic attack. The breathing's picking up. Wait, hang on. I'm sweating a little bit, shaking a little. Wait, what? There was this hypervigilance around panic. So there was this interrogation going on at all times. I get that mental image of the classic detective thing where you're in the room with the lamp over the, and I'm interrogating not just my body at any given moment. All right, what are you doing over there? What are you doing? What are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? Right? Not just doing that with my body, doing that with my mind. Doing that with my mind. And, well, what is engaging in this process of interrogation, but also my mind, right? So I'm using one part of my mind to interrogate another part of my mind. And one of the ironic upshots of all this was engaging in all of this interrogation of myself, my mind, my body, was freaking exhausting. And, well, geez, what was one of my biggest triggers for panic? Feelings of exhaustion, feelings of fatigue, right? So, as I often say in this practice, I discovered yet another way. And this was one of the first ways I discovered back when I first started. The way that I was creating the exact scenario I was trying to avoid based on the way I was trying to avoid it. So this interrogation I was engaging in didn't give me any chance to develop some of those things we talked about last time with feeling grounded. Couldn't gain any familiarity. Couldn't gain any comfort. Mind-body alignment? Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Hell, I didn't have mind-mind alignment. Never mind mind-body alignment. You kidding me? So there's this interrogation going on. But then there's also this demanding that's really that's driving the interrogation, right? The demanding that's saying, no, I must not feel this, that, and the other thing. It's not okay for me to feel it now. It's not okay for me to feel it later. I felt it one other time. That must never happen again. In fact, when I first started seeing the psychologist who got me started on this practice and was explaining to him what was going on, I told him about my panic disorder. I told him what I was there for. I said, I'm here so you can help me kill it. My exact words, kill it. I must not feel this way. So we require this total compliance, this utter predictability, not just from the external world, but from ourselves, from our feelings, from our thoughts, from our moods, from our body. Now, when I say it like that, it seems fairly obvious. Well, that's not going to work. But we still do it. We still do it. And well, why do we do it? Well, we do it for the same reason we do anything. We think we're going to get something out of it. Right? The motivation's always the same. We think we're going to get something out of our attempts that are worth at least the effort we're putting into them. And think, no, this time it'll work. This time it'll work. So what I found is if we want to go about building self-trust, building a sustainable trust, considering that things externally and internally are unpredictable, are sometimes, if not often, out of our control. Well, let's see what the Buddha said about this. That seems to have worked out pretty well for me so far. Buddha talked about the importance of experimentation. What is under our control? Well, these strategies that we're trying to use, that's under our control. May not feel like it because we're so used to doing them, right? They're kind of on autopilot. But how'd they get on autopilot? Well, because we kept doing them. So the fact that they're on autopilot, well, that's ultimately under our control. We brought it there. So, in the spirit of the Buddha, what can we try? What else can we try to see how the results might be different? The beauty I'm always talking about of vicious cycles is that, well, it is a cycle. So you don't have to change every part of it. You can just make a change in one part of the cycle because, well, it's a cycle. So you make a change in one part, it propagates throughout the cycle. It's like, okay, what if I just try that? So instead of interrogation, instead of making demands, what if we try inquiry, investigation, right? Imagine trying to get to know someone by telling them how they have to be rather than asking them how they are. Sounds asinine, doesn't it? But what are we doing with ourselves? And then we wonder why we don't understand ourselves, don't know ourselves, don't trust ourselves. What's that old thing? If we treated our friends the way we treat ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends. Right? This is one of the reasons why in an insight meditation practice, we spend so much time focusing on the breathing. Because the breathing is really not just at the center of the mind and body processes, but they're a reflection of them. The quality of what's going on in the mind, the quality of what's going on in the body, comes out in the breathing. And what we do with the breathing, in turn, affects the quality of the mind and the body. So there's a hell of a lot of information there. That's why I often say at the beginning of our sittings, just for the first couple of minutes, let's get the lay of the land. I don't jump in saying we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Why? You know, one of the things that's always driven me the most batshit in my IT career is when you get like the new big boss that comes in, you know, the new VP or the new whatever, and they come in to an organization and immediately start trying, you know, make an impact, start making changes, it's like, dude, hang on. Back up a second. Can you get the lay of the land first? I mean, things have developed a certain way, maybe for certain reasons. Get to know the backstory. Ask a few questions first. Hang on. All right? One of the things I notice pretty invariably when I start my sittings, I come to the breathing, start getting the lay of the land. The first thing that comes up for me almost every single time is some thought of something I have to get done. Oh, what's the next thing I have to get done today? What's that thing? What do you make sure, you know, I don't forget something, make sure somebody doesn't see me forget something, somebody doesn't see me do something wrong, you know, whatever. That's what comes up first. Again, am I going to be okay? Am I safe? Right? And I just noticed that come up. I'm like, okay, yeah, there's that again. It's a very different experience than following it down its rabbit hole. Because I followed it down its rabbit hole more times than I can count over the years and never reached the end. Never reached the end. So what can I try that's different? Well, I can see it comes up and not follow it. And see what comes up from that. That's different. And then start to see, to my own surprise, more than anybody's, oh, I don't have to follow it down the rabbit hole and, well, shit, I'm still here. I am okay. Oh, interesting. Interesting. One of the things that I like to do a lot, one of my teachers took me through this exercise a few times. And when I'm going through a particularly difficult time, this is one I come back to a lot, is applying the way we would get to know something out in the external world to getting to know something going on internally. For example, if we're experiencing some kind of a thought, some kind of a feeling, emotion, bodily sensation, you might ask yourself, what color is this? What shape is this? What's its texture? All right, so I tend to be very visual. So when my teacher would take me through this and he'd say, okay, so what's the color? What's the texture? Was there some particular feeling, a thought line I was having, perhaps a bodily sensation? I was painting them these vivid images of like, okay, it's sort of red swirled with a little bit of blue, and it's, kind of spread out, and it moves, but in a way that it's contained within its sort of outer frame, and it's good, and it's really interesting the effect that has, because that takes us out of the mind spinning that gets generated around the fear and starts directing it in a way that's really getting to know the experience of the fear or whatever it is in itself. And as we do that, well, we start to see that, oh, I can do that. Okay. Interesting. So I try that thing instead of what I was doing before, and I get that. Oh, interesting. One story I do want to mention, because it's really pertinent here, and it's one I tell most often, because it was perhaps the most impactful one of my practice, was one that happened about, 6 or 8 weeks after I'd started practicing, started learning how to start getting out of the house again. And, I live here in Waltham, Massachusetts, and right next door is Newton, where I grew up. And I call this my Newton Center story. One day I'd gotten to the point where I was starting to drive really short distances again, and was really going to push myself on this one particular day, and pushed myself to go drive to Newton Center, about 15-minute drive, which for me at the time felt like an eternity. It was horrifying. Way the hell out of my safety zone. Drove to the Newton Center T-stop, for those of you who are familiar, on Union Street, this little inlet that had a bunch of little shops, and just parked my truck and went into a gift shop and was looking at greeting cards on a carousel, and all of a sudden this feeling comes up, just like, if you start to freak out now, you start to panic now, you can't get out of here fast enough. You can't get home fast enough. You're screwed. And of course, that thought in itself starts the interrogation. Oh, what's going on? Oh shit. Okay, up, right? And I started to go down that road. And then I caught it and I said, you know what? You're right. You're right. I can't get out of here fast enough. If this shit goes down here, it goes down here. We're putting on a show for these people. So, yeah. Fuck it. Go ahead. Do it. Go to pieces. I can't stop you. And I gave myself permission to have a panic attack in the middle of this gift shop. And, I instantly felt like 30 pounds dropped from my shoulders onto the floor. And my entire body just relaxed. I was like, the hell? And that was when I realized, well, shit. I mean, who have I been fighting here this whole time? Well, myself. So if the part of me I'm identifying with is me, not the panic part, right? If I drop my weapons, well, I'm the only one here fighting. So I guess all the weapons have been dropped. There's no fight. The only fight that's been here all the time is the one I've been bringing with me. So when I stopped interrogating and stopped making demands, it turned out I didn't need to interrogate or make any demands. I was like, oh, well, don't I feel like an ass? And so there was suddenly not just a trust that, oh, yeah, I guess I'll be okay. Or I guess I am okay. But this trust that I could let myself be okay. Let myself just see, well, let's be okay. This was one of my key early insights and shapes my practice to this day. This is that experience of clear seeing that we're developing in this practice. That shift of perception, of our perspective, the stuff you can't unsee. So that line of thinking that says, I must not feel this way. I must not feel this way. Becomes, oh, I know this feeling. And I have seen that I can observe it and check it out, but it doesn't have to dictate my actions. And remember, thought and speech are actions, right? Not just physical outward movement. So to come back to the beginning with the teacher who came up to me when I was in that balancing pose in yoga and said, I feel you struggling, which means you're not trusting someone, either yourself or the floor. Interesting perspective shift. Because if it was myself, I mean, why does losing my balance, why does falling have to be an issue of trust? Right? We just naturally assume, I can't fall. Really? Really? Falling's not allowed. And then we wonder why we're making ourselves miserable. Falling's not allowed? Ever? Oh yeah, I can see your problem. Why does falling have to count as unsafe? Now, sure, if you're a tightrope walker in the circus and you have no net under you, yeah, falling might be unsafe, but, well, they're not us. I mean, they've spent years practicing and training so they can trust, right, that they're probably not going to fall off this friggin' thing, right? But falling out of a yoga pose? That's unsafe? Well, yeah, I guess then in that case, I'm not trusting the floor. It's right fucking there, dude. It's not far. So how about just trusting that the ground will be there to catch you if you fall? Where are we placing our trust? One of the things I talk about so often in this practice is my concept of shatter points, which I can't get into at this point as we're coming up on, I'm actually running a little bit over, but where I'm always talking about, it's not about the amount of energy you're expending so much as where you're directing it. Same thing here. Where are we directing our trust? What are we trusting? And half moon pose in yoga has become one of my favorites now because it's always this opportunity to brush up against that and see the struggle against falling and just say, what if I just allow? What if falling's okay? And kind of like that story I told a few moments ago, once falling becomes okay, yeah, sometimes I fall, but more often I stabilize because I'm not fighting. Again, another instance of causing exactly what I'm trying to avoid because of how I'm trying to avoid it. I'm trying not to fall, and down I go. So we see that while we can't always trust that things will be a certain way, we can develop the trust within ourselves that we can work with them, including when those things are within us, right? Internally and externally. We can observe, we can inquire, we can experiment, we can discern the effects, the results of that experimentation. We can make adjustments based upon that information. That's a process we can rely on. That's something that we can trust. And one of the nice things in my experience is the more we engage in it, the more we see, the more we feel that we can trust it. So, as I say, I've gone a few moments over. I think that's a good break point to sit and work with this for a little bit. Okay? So I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I'm suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And if there is any tension here, physical tension, mental tension, emotional tension, that's perfectly fine. As I was saying earlier in the talk, I like to start simply by getting the lay of the land. What is here? What am I starting with? And tension, kind of like falling, is allowed. Because after all, if we decide it's not allowed, what are we going to do? Force it away? Which is just bringing more tension to the tension that's already here? Oh, brilliant. Again, causing exactly what we're trying to avoid because of the way we're trying to avoid it. So, if there's some tension here, fine. That's information. It's something we came to see. So let's take a moment and get that lay of the land. What's here? What's expressing itself mentally, physically, emotionally? You may just, pick one if you like. And also, you may notice what thoughts and feelings are coming up around it. That's also something that's here. It's also something that's allowed, that we came to see. And as I mentioned, we often center on the breathing because it is a reflection of what's going on in the mind, the body. It's really a storehouse of information. And one of the skills we build in this practice is learning how to hear and process that information. And I had a really interesting experience in terms of today's topic with the breathing when I started this practice, because the direction I received was observe the breathing without trying to make any changes, without trying to control it. And for someone who had been hyper-vigilantly controlling his breathing for almost 10 years to try to stave off panic attack, well, that was horrifying advice. It's like, you want me to just let the breathing be and do what it wants? Are you freaking kidding me? I had demands for my breathing. It needs to be this way. It needs to be that way. I was afraid I wasn't going to get enough air in. I might pass out, might die. On the one hand, I'm worrying about passing out from not getting enough air. On the other hand, I'm worried about panic attack from breathing too fast. No trust. Somehow, some reason, I gave it a shot. I gave it just enough rope to hang me. And, well, pretty clearly didn't. It wasn't comfortable at first. Scary. But started to notice, you know what? I'm still here. This is uncomfortable. It's not uncomfortable anymore, but at the time, this is uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean it's unsafe. So I can observe this and see where it goes. And so that's what I offer to you. You absolutely can shape and control the breathing in this practice. There is a place for that. But you do not have to. And I almost invariably work with the breathing simply by watching it as it is. And the irony there is, as I do that, I start to notice more and more subtle levels of controlling and shaping that I'm actually engaging in. Because I'm developing that clarity around the process. And that's fine. I don't then try to control the controlling. I just notice, oh, there's a little controlling going on there. Okay. If something arises that is uncomfortable, perhaps unfamiliar, and unfamiliar doesn't necessarily mean something we haven't seen before. It could be a thought or a feeling we've seen many times, but we've never gotten to know it. So something uncomfortable, something unfamiliar. The body, the mind, emotions. think back to what I said about what it would be like to try to get to know somebody by telling them how they must be, rather than asking them how they are. Think of that example of how we get to know something in the outer world by examining its color, its shape, its texture. Think about what's under our control, which is the strategies we use for working with the things that arise. Do we get to choose what comes up? Not usually. Do we get to choose how we deal with it when it comes up? Oh yeah. So we work with the part we can control. It's not easy, right? Again, this stuff ends up on autopilot because of the habits we've built over the years and so forth. So this is a process of building new habits, but we have to catch the old ones first. We have to catch, not that they are happening. They're not happening to us. We have to catch how we are doing them. And when they're on autopilot, that can take a lot of observation, a lot of seeing. And that's what we're doing here. We're giving ourselves a chance to see how we are actually living, what we are actually doing. So we can see how we are actually getting in our own way, so we can actually stop. When in doubt, just come back to the breathing. Perhaps use some of these same techniques. Asking how the breathing is. Perhaps the breathing has a color, a shape, a texture. We're creating a shift in perspective. Starting to build a stronger foundation upon which we can fall now and then. because we can trust that foundation we've built. You might check to see if you're engaging in the kind of tension that I was talking about at the very beginning of the talk. Or sometimes when I'm sitting on a chair, I'm holding myself up on it as if I don't trust the chair can do the job. You might notice, hey, am I on something stable? But not trusting it to hold me up. I don't mean we just go completely limp, right? I want to have good posture and so forth. That's why I say, I imagine I have a string suspending me from the ceiling. A way to sit up straight, right? But not tensing to sit up straight. Just allowing the spine to lengthen. Whatever part of my body is not actually holding me up can just relax. In its own time, of course. I can't force it to relax. But it's allowed to relax when it's ready. But I'll notice, oh, am I tensing in my upper legs? You know, the part that's actually on the chair. Am I tensing there as if I got to be ready in case the chair suddenly falls out from under me? It's that old saying, the way we do anything is the way we do everything. So hell, if I can't trust the chair, how am I engaging with myself? And you don't even have to try to make a change. You don't have to try to force the legs to relax. Right? You can't force relaxation. It's like trying to force away tension. You're just creating more. And you're just noticing. Remember the observation, the getting the lay of the land? It's what we came to see. I'll close today's sitting with a quote from Thanissaro Bhikkhu, an American monk that I study and quote quite often. He says, "A frequent question is, how can you tell if you're making progress in your meditation?" And one of the answers is, when the mind slips off its object, you get faster and faster at bringing it back. Notice the answer isn't the mind doesn't slip off at all. It's you're expected to slip off. It's a normal part of the practice, a normal part of the training. The point lies in being more alert to what's going on and quicker to remedy the situation when you've slipped off the breath. So an important part of learning how to meditate is learning how to fall. They say that when you start learning Aikido, the first thing they teach you is how to fall without hurting yourself. The purpose is that it makes you less and less afraid to fall, less and less damaged, of course, by the fall, also less likely to fall, more willing to take chances. So the trick when you meditate is learning how to bring the mind back with a minimum amount of recrimination, a minimum amount of self-criticism, with just the simple observation, I haven't come here to think about next week's schedule or last night's fiascos or whatever. I'm here to focus on the breath. Simply leave those other things and come back. Learn how to do it without tying your mind up in knots. Thank you, everyone. I will put a few links into the chat, and then we can get to my favorite part, which is opening it up for discussion and questions, hearing from you folks. So over in the chat, I've put in links to my website and my sessions page. These free sessions are supported by one-on-ones that I do with folks who are interested in exploring something you might be going through at this point in your life that you'd like to see how a Buddhist framework, mindfulness, insight meditation, these things might help. These practices have been around 2,600 years and all around this grand mud ball we're trying to occupy together, and they're still as relevant today as ever because they really go towards the roots of our stress and suffering, regardless of where the stress and suffering might be coming from. So if that's something you'd like to explore, there's a link there to my website and my sessions page. You're welcome to reach out or set something up on there if you like. I have my email address there if you'd like to reach out directly. My YouTube channel's on there where a lot of these sessions get posted. I put up one every couple of weeks or so. You can subscribe on there and know when the next one is coming out. And my Patreon page as well. All the same sessions are available there. If you'd like to help support these, you can do so through there. Or also, I put up my PayPal and Venmo because some folks have asked about supporting these directly. So that's available as well. So, with that said, let's open it up. I think I saw a hand fly up from Marshall as I was starting. So yeah, hey Marshall.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. So I want to get back to the colors, the shapes, the textures. So when you had a thought of a potential panic attack coming on, you somehow gave that a figure, a shape, contour, color. You made that thought into some type of tangible visualization. Then what did you do with it? Did you just visualize it leaving your body? Did you visualize? I mean, I'm interested in what you did with that visualization.
That's an interesting one. So when I started working with the teacher that clued me into that technique with the texture and so forth, that was years later. By the time I started working with that technique, I mean, I was at least 15 years into my practice. So my relationship to to the sensations and experience of panic was, far, far different. So I've never specifically engaged with that technique with an experience of panic. Typically, if I do, because it still happens very occasionally, right? If a feeling of panic suddenly arises, that's not the technique I go to. The technique I go to is that one from my Newton Center story. I'm just like, oh, here it comes. Here's the initial feeling of this must not happen. Seen that before. Seen where that leads. Oh, but remember that thing I did that time where I stood down. And remember what happened then. Worst case scenario, okay? Worst case scenario, the panic attack happens anyway. Okay. It's still going to be worse if I fight it. It'll be over faster if I don't, right? Now, with that said, this is not to say that I don't specifically examine some of the different parts of it, because one of the most valuable things I found that we can do is take these collections of experiences, these groups of processes, which is what a panic attack is. It's a group of processes. There's the heart rate, there's the breathing, there's perhaps sweating, there's perhaps shaking. One of the things that I tend to notice the most quickly, and that I tend to find the most scary, and I do see a texture with this very vividly, is this head swimming. So, and this is the first time I've really described it in these terms vocally. So this is something I haven't actually explained before. So let's see how it goes. You're kind of seeing me do this in real time. The head swimming aspect of it, I see as, imagine like a yin and yang sort of thing, where they're constantly chasing their own and each other's tail at the same time. And I won't go too far in this because this isn't really your question. This isn't Let's Analyze Ron hour, but I'm happy to share it. But this is what I'm seeing is this chaos of energy that is scary because it seems out of control and dangerous. I've come to a place in my practice where I recognize, because I've seen it again and again and again, not just with this, but with anything uncomfortable, that it might be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean it's unsafe. And the extent to which it's a problem is dependent upon how much of a problem I make out of it. If I fight it, that's going to stir up that energy more. If I just observe the energy as it is, at some point, it's going to have to stop. I mean, it has to. It has to. So, a long way of saying that I don't really engage in that particular technique, which isn't to say you can't. There's all sorts of techniques and different ones work for different things at different times. But for me, by the time I came across that technique, my relationship with panic had changed so drastically based on earlier techniques that on the rare occasion something might start to come up. It's like, whoa, holy shit, what the fuck? I go back to the one that I couldn't unsee that originally changed my perception and perspective of it back in those early days.
Thank you.
Cheers. Hey, Ann, how's it going?
Oh, it's great.
Awesome.
Thank you. That meditation, that period we just have was utterly remarkable.
How?
Utterly.
How so?
Well, I've never done a lot of work with breath at all. But when I started out watching it, I was looking at it. I was looking at and feeling it. And I just went down into behind what I was feeling, which was a lot from the older days, is it was an iron curtain. When I made wrong decisions, and I've made some dangerously wrong decisions, the door slammed down and I wasn't going to breathe again. Outwardly, it was only for me to survive the stupid shit that I was doing. And I went back through some of the instances where I was feeling that. And the breathing was shallow and pit bull guarded, you know. Everything was just, fuck you, you're just not getting in there. At the end of that sitting period, things fell, and they fell to a place where there was wide open spaces. It was like from A to Z. Very heart-centered, openness, beautiful trip. I'm still afraid of making bad decisions. I mean, bad decisions. But as I get used, that period of time showed me the possibility of relaxing into falling and the benefit that is possible through that. So brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers. I'm glad that was so impactful for you. Yeah, it sounds like you were getting a lot of information from the breathing. And I really like the imagery of the iron, right? I mean, geez, it doesn't get much more heavy and dense than that, right? And the breathing behind. I liked when you said breathing behind, like the process, what was going on. Sometimes I get that image of, again, me with my visualizations, I get that image of like this thundering waterfall. And that's that sort of mayhem and the fear of like what's, you know, going through it or going, but then when you do get behind it, it's actually calm back there. It's like, oh, huh. So we're fearing what's behind the waterfall because the waterfall itself seems so powerful and threatening. And so often we're not willing to experience a thought or a feeling because it seems so powerful and threatening. But what's really become powerful and threatening about it is our unwillingness to experience it. And then suddenly when we finally get to the point where we do experience it, we're like, oh, geez, what the hell was I avoiding that all for? You want to talk about falling? I mean, so much of this practice is learning how to laugh at yourself because you just start seeing the shit you've been doing and you're just like, dude, what the hell? Yeah? Seeing how you've been falling in an attempt not to fall. Like, we try so hard not to fall. All we're doing is, we're trying so hard not to fall. What we end up doing is just staying on the ground instead of getting up. Because at least that way we can't fall. It's like, oh, brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah, the feeling sometimes in the past when I've had 3 panic attacks. Okay. And one time it just felt like I was entombed, and that word came to my mind, and I have never heard that word. I mean, never was that word in my vocabulary. And I've trusted that entombment feeling more than opening up. So this is really a huge shift in my life right at the moment.
That's awesome. And I deeply resonate with the entombed. I've never thought of it in that word in itself, but that is absolutely one of the experiences that I have and like a panic attack is this feeling of being trapped in the body. Years ago, when I started working with this and so forth, and one of the things that I found was, you know, as I resumed living again and so forth for a couple of years after I was able to go out, I was working and the whole bit, I would still go out and drive like, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, just wherever. So my comfort zone didn't start to shrink too much again. But there was still this fear that there was like a limit to it. There was a certain extent where I was just like, I can't, I didn't know what it was, but I was like, there was still this barrier. And then I won't get into the whole story here, but something came up after about 2 years, maybe about 2 years of this. Something came up where I needed to go to New Jersey, which is, that's like 5-hour drive. And I was like, so didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. Did it. And the way I described it afterwards, because this was the feeling I had, and this is exactly what it felt like. I felt like I had shattered a glass coffin that I had been in.
Yeah.
And that's the whole reason I'm telling this story, is because when you said entombed,
and I was in a coffin.
Yeah.
That's how I pictured myself when I was in a coffin, entombed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you said that, it just bang. I mean, that just right. I'm deeply, deeply, deeply resonated when you said that. When you said that word. Yeah. I'm glad you had such a great experience with this.
Oh,
today.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. Great to see you. Thanks. Hey, Anita.
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you so much for your very thorough and well-prepared presentations. They're always so wonderful. So thank you so much for that.
Cheers. Thank you.
And I was just thinking, the subject of panic and anxiety has been coming up. And I have been meditating for a decade or more. And I know, and it's been very transformational for me. But I feel like I notice in so many of my friends and families, like ways that they're stumbling. And I know I can't help somebody help themselves per se, or help them see the light, or even if like meditation or something is for them. But I'm curious, you must see that as well. And I wonder how you maybe struggle with it or try to help people, maybe, I don't know, other than being a great role model.
That's a great question. And yes, I do see it. And in fact, it's one of the effects of a practice like this, is when we start to see how we're getting in our own way. Well, I mean, we all tend to get in our own way in similar ways. So we can't really see how we're getting in our own way without seeing how other people are getting in their own way, especially when the way they're getting in their own way is so similar to the way that we do ourselves, which only makes us want to help them more, right? It's like, oh no, I found a way through that, right? So everything you said is quite right. We can't do it for them. And one of the best things we can do is set a good example. Something to watch out for. And again, this is I don't think I've said it today, but I say it fairly often. It's the bottom line question that always, 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 the one thing that this practice is leading to, the only thing the Buddha taught for 45 years. How do we alleviate our own stress and suffering? So we want to watch for that point where we are causing ourselves stress and suffering based on seeing somebody else getting in their own way and wanting to change that, right? One of those sneaky ways that seems honorable, right, of actually creating stress and suffering, actually engaging in exactly what we are ostensibly trying to mitigate. So there's nothing wrong with making a suggestion. But it's like anything else. It's something you can put out there, and if the person bites, great. If not, leave it be. Nobody makes a change until they want to make a change. And something that I have found for myself is we make changes when our discomfort with the way things are finally outweighs our fear of making the change. And that's not something that we can do or give to somebody else.
I love that. I love that in so many ways. And the one thing that I have learned over the years is that I never want to make a suggestion to anybody because of that. But I love the fact that the discomfort outweighs the fear of making the change, because that brings to me in my suffering of watching people I love suffer. And I feel like I'm kind of being called out, like, am I enabling them in a way by making them comfortable in their discomfort, if you will? Not, and then that discomfort's never going to outweigh the fear of making the change.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
It's a beautiful illustration of that line that I draw sometimes. And I don't mean just me. I didn't invent this. But the line that I mentioned between being nice versus being kind. Right? Being nice is that thing that we do when we want to be liked. So yeah, let me help you ease your discomfort from the way you keep getting in your own way. Let me make your suffering easier to bear for you. It's one thing to make somebody's pain easier to bear. We don't have a choice about pain. But if somebody's causing themselves suffering, and we are making that experience easier for them, is that really helping them? Well, not in the long run, no. So that's being nice, right? Being kind is doing something that's actually helpful, something that's actually in the other person's long-term best interest, which making their own stress and suffering that they're causing themselves a more pleasant place to be, that's not it. Yeah, that's not it.
I've got a lot to think on this, but thank you so much.
These are great questions. And yeah, feel free to drop me a line if anything else comes up that you'd like to discuss.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers. Hey, Susan. How's it going?
Hi. Yeah, I have an interesting twist on your yoga story.
Oh, great.
I really like the story. And clearly when you were in a yoga pose, if you weren't trusting the floor, it's not as though there was any real danger because you were very close to the floor.
Right.
So my problem is, if I'm around the house walking or in the neighborhood, I don't think it's a good idea to trust the sidewalk that I'm not going to, fall on it. And I took a short walk this morning, and where I live in the neighborhood, there's a lot of, uneven places with place where the one block is up. And so the sidewalk is not all that safe. And so what I've come to the conclusion is maybe I really shouldn't trust the sidewalk. I trust myself and just need to be as aware as I can be and mindful that I've got to watch out for where I'm going, and, trusting myself because I can't trust that other thing. And it does help. Definitely helps. A good friend of mine actually did fall in this area on an uneven sidewalk, right on her face, was, bruised for a very long time, broke her glasses, blah, blah. So that's just thank you for sharing the story, but I have a different twist on it.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that. That could be seen as a different twist on that story, but not on the takeaway from it. This is where I mentioned, where are we placing our trust? I wouldn't place my trust on an uneven ground either. Right? So a yoga studio floor, yeah, okay. Does that mean I'm going to trust any ground surface anywhere? Does that mean I'm gonna trust an earthquake fault line in the middle of a, of course not. Am I going to trust a frozen over pond as the temperatures are rising and stuff's melting? Hell no, right? So yeah, I think you're illustrating beautifully what I was mentioning at the end. Where are we placing our trust? Right? Are we making our falling an issue of trust in a yoga studio? Well, if we are, that could be holding us back. If we're doing it on a tightrope somewhere, no, we're going to have to make sure we can trust that. Because I can't trust that ground because that ground is 50 feet below me because I'm at a freaking circus putting on a show, right? So it's all context dependent. Is it reasonable for me to trust that ground? Is it reasonable for me? If I can trust that ground, is it really unsafe for me to fall? Oh, I can trust that ground, so no. Is it safe for me to trust that ground? No, it's not. So then is whether or not I fall a matter of safety? Yes. Yeah. As your friend found out, right? Yeah. So no, I think you're illustrating the takeaway perfectly. This is where our clear seeing and discernment comes in, because it's not always going to be as obvious as an uneven ground outside. Sometimes it's going to be something inside. Might not be so clear. And so that's why we engage in this practice, right? So we can develop that clear seeing. Yeah. Cheers for that. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in quickly before we break? Hey, Barbara.
Can you see me?
I can see you. How's it going?
Hello?
Great to see
Hey,
you.
how you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. I just came for a quick hello.
Hello.
And thank you for doing what you do. You appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you. Appreciate you. Appreciate all of you. Thanks so much. All right. That seems like a good place to wrap up. So, folks, have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.